When I look at my reflection in the mirror, it seems to me that 67 years is some kind of ridiculous mistake. Inside, I still feel like I'm 40, maybe 45. Only my hands with their protruding veins, the wrinkles on my neck, and the grey strands of hair that I stopped dyeing 3 years ago remind me of how much time has actually passed. My name is Hazel Brambleworth. I have lived in Bolingbroke, a small town where everyone knows each other, but prefers to pretend they don't, for 30 years. I worked as a tax inspector for 32 years. 32 years of sorting other people's lives into numbers on paper. I knew the income of every business in our district and could tell at a glance where people were trying to cheat. People didn't like me for it, but they respected me. Perhaps this job left its mark on me. I began to notice inconsistencies everywhere, even in the words of those closest to me. Our house on Amberley Street is one of the oldest in the neighbourhood. It's a 2-storey house with a porch and a small garden. Alan and I bought it 5 years after we got married, when our son Noel was only 3 years old. I remember Alan standing on the porch, tall with a shock of dark hair, saying, "This is our place, Hazel. This is where our son will grow up, where we'll grow old." He didn't know he'd be growing old without me. Alan died 10 years ago. A heart attack, sudden and merciless. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. He just didn't wake up that morning. It was like the ceiling had collapsed. You're standing amid the debris and you don't know how to walk on that floor anymore. Noel was 30 at the time, newly married to Valeria, a young woman with a perpetually dissatisfied expression and a habit of clicking her tongue when she didn't get her way. I remember the day they met. Noel brought her to dinner, proud and happy. Valeria smiled and talked about her job as an administrator at a dental clinic and how important it was to make a good first impression. Alan immediately took a liking to her. I sensed something false about her, the way she stood up too straight, the way she looked around our house, assessing it. Maybe it's a professional habit. I've spent too long looking for loopholes in numbers to not look for them in people. After Alan died, the house became too big for me. When Noel suggested that Valeria move in with me, I agreed. I thought it was something Alan would have approved of, helping his son get on his feet while they saved up for their own place. I thought it would be temporary. A year, maybe 2. 10 years have passed. They're still here. Noel works as an insurance adjuster, spending his days driving around to houses, assessing damage from fires, floods, and other misfortunes. Valeria is still an administrator, only now at a different clinic. I often wonder if it wouldn't be easier for them to move out, but then I remember the cost of rent in our city and realise that they would be unlikely to find anything comparable to our house at the same price. At first, we lived quite peacefully. They occupied the 2nd floor, and I lived on the 1st floor. I cooked dinner, and Valeria sometimes helped with the cleaning. Noel fixed things that broke. But over time, I began to notice changes. Valeria came down for dinner less and less often. Noel stayed late at work more and more often. Our conversations became shorter and the silences longer. And then I started finding small items out of place. The antique vase Alan gave me for our 20th anniversary suddenly moved from the mantelpiece to the bookcase. Photos of Alan and me gradually disappeared from the walls, giving way to pictures of Noel and Valeria. At first, I thought I was starting to forget. Age, after all. But then I overheard Valeria talking to a friend on the phone. "Of course, when the house is ours, we'll redecorate everything. This old wallpaper is just awful." I didn't make a scene. Something inside me, that core that helped me withstand the piercing stares of the businessmen whose tax returns I checked, prevented me from showing how much it hurt to hear that. Instead, I began to notice more. How Valeria cringes when I turn on my favourite classical music. How Noel sighs when I tell stories from the past. How they glance at each other, thinking I don't see them. And how sometimes, very rarely, I think I hear them whisper, "How much longer is this going to last?" Gradually, I ceased to be the mistress of my own home. My opinion was asked less and less. My habits were taken into account less and less. I began to feel like a guest who had stayed too long. But it was my home, and I had no intention of leaving. And then, the chest pains started. At first they were mild, as if someone were pressing lightly on my sternum. I blamed it on age, on the weather, on anything. But they grew stronger, and one morning I woke up gasping for breath, the pain spreading to my left arm. I was scared. I sat on the edge of the bed trying to breathe, but every movement of my chest was accompanied by sharp pain. I just sat there for a few minutes, hoping it would pass. But it only got worse. I had to call for help. "Noel!" My voice sounded weaker than I expected. "Noel, I need help!" I heard footsteps on the stairs, then the door flew open and a sleepy Noel appeared in his pajama bottoms and a t-shirt. "What's wrong?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "I feel sick," I managed to say, pressing my hand to my chest. "I think it's my heart." His face changed, his sleepiness replaced by alarm. "Should I call an ambulance?" he asked, already reaching for his phone. I nodded. While he called, I tried to breathe in short gasps so as not to increase the pain. Noel stood next to me, shifting awkwardly from one foot to the other. "The doctor wants to know if you can describe the pain," he said, covering the microphone with his hand. "It's pressing," I whispered. "It's radiating to my left arm and shoulder." He repeated my words, then listened to something else and said, "Okay, we'll wait." When he finished the call, he sat down on the edge of the bed, not too close to me. "They're on their way. They said not to move or drink anything." I nodded. We sat in silence. The pain pulsed, receding and then returning with renewed force. A door slammed somewhere, and a minute later Valeria peeked into the room, wearing a silk robe and her hair perfectly styled even in her sleep. "What's going on?" she asked, looking around the room. "Mom's having heart problems," Noel replied. "I called an ambulance." Valeria pursed her lips. "At 6 in the morning? Seriously? I was going to say that you didn't choose the time for a heart attack, but the pain intensified again and I could only moan quietly. "Val, please," Noel said quietly. "Not now." She rolled her eyes. "Fine. I'll go get dressed since you woke me up anyway." And she left, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later. 2 paramedics, a young man with a neat beard and a girl with short hair, quickly came up to my room. They worked together smoothly and efficiently. They took my blood pressure, did a cardiogram, and asked a few questions. "Mrs. Brambleworth, we're taking you to the hospital," the paramedic said when they finished the initial examination. "It looks like a heart attack. You need a more thorough examination." I nodded. They helped me onto the stretcher and began to carry me downstairs. Noel followed behind, already dressed, carrying my purse. Valeria stood at the foot of the stairs, her arms crossed over her chest. "I'm coming with you," Noel said as I was being loaded into the ambulance. "You're supposed to be at Ravenwood today," Valeria reminded him. "Important client, remember?" Noel froze, clearly torn between his duty as a son and his job. "I can call and reschedule the meeting." "On such short notice?" Valeria shook her head. "The client will be furious. You know how important this contract is." I saw Noel hesitate. Finally, he turned to me. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I really can't miss this meeting. It's a big client, and my bonus depends on it. I'll come to the hospital right after, I promise." I wanted to say that I understood, that everything was fine, but suddenly I realized that wasn't true, that my son was choosing work over his mother, who was having a heart attack, and that Valeria had done everything she could to push him to make that choice. "Of course," was all I could say. The paramedic closed the ambulance door, and we drove off. The last thing I saw was Noel and Valeria standing at the gate of the house, and she was saying something to him, her hand on his shoulder. At the hospital, everything spun with renewed force. Tests, cardiograms, conversations with doctors. The pain was dulled by the medication they gave me, but I remained anxious. In the evening, Dr. Phelps came in to see me, a short man with attentive eyes and neatly trimmed grey hair at his temples. He sat down next to my bed and opened a folder with the test results. "Mrs. Brambleworth, you have coronary heart disease," he said bluntly. "Your coronary arteries are narrowed, which is restricting blood flow to your heart. What you had today was not a full-blown heart attack, but what we call unstable angina. But it is a serious warning." "What now?" I asked. "We need to discuss treatment options. In your case, given the degree of narrowing of the arteries and the condition of your heart muscle, I recommend surgery, aortocoronary bypass surgery. Heart surgery? My mouth went dry. Yes, it's a serious procedure, but in your case, it's necessary. We'll create bypasses for the blood around the narrowed arteries using vessels from another part of the body. I took a deep breath as much as the pain would allow. What are the risks? Dr. Phelps didn't beat around the bush. Like any heart surgery, it carries certain risks. But without it, the risks are even higher. In your case, it's not a question of if, but when you will have a full-blown heart attack. And when should the surgery be performed? The sooner the better. I would recommend next week, as soon as we stabilize your condition and conduct all the necessary additional tests. I closed my eyes for a moment. My thoughts revolved around my home, Noel, Valeria, how they would react to the news. Would they be there for me? Or would they see this as yet another problem I was creating for them? Okay, I finally said. If it's necessary, then it's necessary. Dr. Phelps nodded. That's the right decision. I'll schedule all the necessary tests, and we'll discuss the operation plan in more detail tomorrow. Right now, you need to rest. He left, and I was left alone in the ward, thinking about what lay ahead. Noel never came, despite his promise. He called late in the evening, saying that a meeting had gone on longer than expected, and then there was traffic. "How are you, Mum?" he asked, his voice tired. "I need heart surgery," I said bluntly. "A bypass, next week." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Heart surgery?" he finally asked. "Is it serious?" "Serious enough to come to the hospital and discuss it in person," I couldn't help saying. Noel sighed. "I'm sorry, Mum. I really wanted to come, but today was a crazy day. I'll come tomorrow, I promise." "Okay," I said, feeling disappointment growing inside me. "See you tomorrow." He arrived the next day, but not alone, with Valeria. They entered the room together, Noel with a bouquet of flowers, Valeria with a forced smile. I sat on the bed, propped up by pillows, and looked at them. Two people who were supposed to be my family, but who seemed so foreign. "Hi, Mum," Noel said, placing the flowers on the nightstand. "How are you feeling?" "I felt better," I replied dryly. "We were talking to Dr. Phelps in the hallway," Valeria interjected, sitting down on a chair by the window. "He explained the situation. Heart surgery is serious, Hazel." I noticed how she called me by my name instead of Mum, or even Mrs. Brambleworth. It was a small but telling detail. "I know," I said. "Dr. Phelps explained everything. You'll need special care after the operation," Noel continued, standing by the bed. "Rehabilitation. I'll manage," I replied. "It's not the first time I've been alone." Noel and Valeria exchanged glances. That look I knew so well. The look that said, she's making it difficult again. "Mom." Noel sat down on the edge of the bed. "Valeria and I have discussed the situation. We think you'll be better off recovering in a special place, where there's professional care, nurses, all the necessary equipment." I tensed up. "What kind of special place?" "Sunset Gardens," Valeria quickly interjected. "It's a wonderful rehabilitation centre on the outskirts of town. It has excellent reviews, and they'll take care of you around the clock." I looked at her, then at Noel. My son avoided my gaze. "You want to send me to a nursing home?" "It's not a nursing home," Noel objected. "It's a rehabilitation centre, temporary until you get better." But I saw the truth in their eyes. It wasn't concern for my health. It was a desire to get rid of me, the problem I had become. "No," I said firmly. "After the surgery, I'm coming home. To my home." "Hazel, be reasonable," Valeria leaned forward. "You're going to need constant care. Noel and I work, we can't be there all day." "I'll hire a nurse if I need to," I said, "but I'm going home." Noel sighed. "Mum, we just want what's best for you." I looked him straight in the eye. "No, Noel, you want what's best for you. Don't confuse the two." He looked away. Valeria pursed her lips, clearly unhappy with how the conversation was going. "We'll talk about this later," she said, getting up. "Right now, you need to rest. We'll come back tomorrow." They left, And I was left alone, feeling anxiety building inside me. I knew they wouldn't give up so easily. This was only the beginning of the fight for my home, for my right to live the way I wanted, not the way they wanted. And I was determined not to give up without a fight. This was my home, my life, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even my own son, decide for me. The morning of the operation was grey and rainy. I woke up long before the nurse came to wake me up. I lay there looking out the window, at the rain blurring the outlines of the trees outside the hospital window, thinking that today my heart would be stopped and restarted. The thought was both frightening and strangely comforting. It was as if I was being given a second chance, a new beginning. Noel and Valeria didn't come before the operation, even though I had told them the time. Noel called and said he had to leave urgently to see a client, but that he would be thinking of me. I wondered if he really had a client or if it was just an excuse. I chose not to dwell on it. Dr. Phelps came in to see me before the operation, and his calm confidence calmed my nerves a little. "Are you ready, Mrs. Brambleworth?" he asked, checking my chart. "As much as is possible," I replied, trying to smile. "Everything will be fine," he said, squeezing my hand slightly. "We have an excellent team, and you're in good shape for your age." I wanted to say something sarcastic about my age, but I didn't have time. The nurses entered the room to take me to the operating room. The operating room was a brightly lit room with lots of machines and people in green surgical suits. They bustled around me, connecting sensors, checking readings, talking in their medical jargon full of terms I didn't understand. "Mrs. Brambleworth, I'm going to give you the anaesthetic now," said the anaesthesiologist, a middle-aged man with kind eyes. "Count backwards from 10, please." 10, 9, 8, I began. But by 7, my eyelids felt heavy, and by 6, the world dissolved. I woke up in intensive care, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the noise of machines. My chest hurt as if a truck had run over it. There was a lump in my throat from the intubation tube, which fortunately had already been removed. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey me. "Don't try to move, Mrs. Brambleworth," the nurse said quietly as she approached the bed. "The operation was successful, but you need time to recover." I wanted to ask how much time had passed, but only a wheeze came out of my throat. The nurse held a straw with ice to my lips, and it was the best thing I had ever tasted. "Thank you," I whispered when I could speak. "You're welcome," she smiled. "Your son called to ask about the results of the operation. We told him everything went well." He called. He didn't come. He just called. I spent 2 days in intensive care before being transferred to a regular ward. Noel didn't show up the whole time. He called every day to ask how I was feeling, but he never came. Valeria didn't call at all. On the 3rd day after the operation, when I had already been transferred to a regular ward, Noel showed up. He brought fruit and magazines, but he looked tense and awkward. "How are you, Mum?" he asked, sitting down on a chair by the bed. "I'm alive, as you can see," I replied, "but not thanks to your support." He grimaced. "Mum, please. I really couldn't come any earlier. Work is crazy. We have a new big client, and I'm torn between meetings." "Of course," I said, looking out the window. "Work is more important." "Don't start," he sighed. "I really wanted to come earlier, and I called every day." "Where's Valeria?" I asked, changing the subject. She's got a lot of work too, and she hasn't been feeling very well lately." I snorted. "Not feeling very well. And I'm fine with my chest cut open." Noel stayed with me for about an hour. He talked about work, about some complicated flooding case he had to investigate. I listened half-heartedly, watching him. When did he become such a stranger? This man with receding hairline and wrinkles around his eyes was once my little boy who brought me flowers from the neighbour's yard and told me about his dreams of becoming an astronaut. "Dr. Phelps says you're recovering well," Noel said as he was leaving, "but you'll still need a long period of rehabilitation." "I know," I replied. "He told me. Valeria and I think Sunset Gardens is still the best option for your recovery." And so we were back to that conversation again. I felt irritation rising inside me. "No, Noel, I already told you I'm going home." "But you'll have professional care there," he insisted. "Nurses and doctors on call. At home, you'll be alone most of the time." Valeria and I both work. We can't provide you with constant supervision. I can hire a nurse for a few hours a day if necessary, I said. But I'm going home, Noel, to my home. He sighed, clearly dissatisfied with my stubbornness. All right, Mom, we'll talk about this later. I have to go now. Call me if you need anything. And he left, leaving me with the feeling that the conversation was far from over. The next few days passed in the routine of hospital life. Tests, examinations, bandage changes. The nurses were kind to me, especially Rita, a plump middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a soft voice. She helped me with my first painful attempts to stand up and walk around the ward. "You're doing well, Mrs. Brambleworth," she said, supporting me by the elbow. "Many people don't get out of bed for weeks after an operation like this, and you're already on your feet." "I don't have time for a long recovery," I replied, gritting my teeth against the pain with every step. Noel came twice more, always briefly, and always alone. Valeria never showed up. Instead, I received a card from her with the usual wishes for a speedy recovery, as if I were not her husband's mother, but a distant acquaintance. On the 7th day after the operation, when I was already able to walk down the corridor on my own, I suddenly felt like stretching my legs a little. Rita helped me to the hall and I decided to walk on my own, leaning on the special cane I had been given for rehabilitation. I walked slowly down the corridor, enjoying the relative freedom of movement, when I heard familiar voices coming from the door of the visitors' lounge, Noel and Valeria. I didn't know they were coming today and was about to go in when I heard my name in the conversation. I stopped, listening involuntarily. "I don't understand why she's so stubborn," Valeria said irritably. "Sunset Gardens is a great place. I went there myself yesterday. It's clean, the staff are polite, and there's even a rehabilitation pool." "You know, Mum," Noel replied with a heavy sigh. "She's always been headstrong, and it's only gotten worse with age." "It's not headstrongness, it's common sense," Valeria countered. "She needs professional care. You yourself said that Dr. Phelps recommended constant supervision for the first few weeks after discharge." "I know, but—" "No buts, Noel. I'm not going to take time off work to sit with your mother. I have my own life, my own career, and hiring a full-time caregiver is crazy expensive." I gripped the cane handle tighter, feeling my pulse quicken. So it wasn't about caring for my health, but about the inconvenience my return home would cause. "She says she can hire a caregiver herself," Noel said uncertainly. "With what money? Her pension?" Valeria let out a short laugh. "You know how expensive private nurses are, and insurance only covers part of the costs. Maybe we could help." "We are helping." Valeria's voice rose. "We paid the first installment for Sunset Gardens. That's a lot of money, by the way." There was a pause. I thought about leaving, but something kept me there. I had to hear her out. "Listen," Valeria continued, calmer now. "I understand that she's your mother, but we have to think about ourselves too. We've been living in her house for 10 years. 10 years, we can't even renovate it to our liking because it's her house. Can you imagine what it will be like when she comes back after the operation? She'll be even more demanding, even more controlling." "I know," Noel replied quietly. "But she'll be fine at Sunset Gardens," Valeria said more softly. "She'll have people to talk to and she'll be looked after by professionals. And we'll visit her, of course." "Once a month?" Noel asked bitterly, and I felt a pang of pain for him. He is my son, after all, and somewhere deep down he probably feels guilty about what is happening. "Don't be dramatic," Valeria snapped. "We'll visit her every weekend if you want." There was another pause. I was about to leave when I heard words that made me freeze. "I don't want her to come back," Valeria said abruptly. "It's time we stopped beating around the bush. Yes, the house belongs to her, but we have a right to our own lives too. 10 years, Noel. 10 years we've been living as if we were renting, even though this is our home. I want to finally hang the curtains I like, not the ones she likes. I want to remodel the kitchen. I want to live my own life." "You can't just tell my mother not to come back to her own house," Noel objected, but somewhat uncertainly. "I can if it's for her own good," Valeria retorted. "Think about it. What's better? Living in a special centre where you're cared for around the clock? Or in a 2-story house where you have to climb stairs with a bad heart? Where no one watches over you most of the day?" You talk as if she's no longer capable of taking care of herself. Isn't that true? She's 67, Noel. She just had serious heart surgery. She's not young anymore. It's time to admit it. I felt anger rising inside me. 67 isn't that old. I've taken care of myself my whole life, and I can do it after the surgery too. All right, Noel finally said, defeat sounding in his voice. Let's try to convince her that Sunset Gardens is the best option. But if she refuses... She won't refuse, Valeria said confidently. She simply won't have a choice. We'll tell her at the last minute when everything is already arranged, and Dr. Phelps is on our side. He also thinks she needs constant care. I'm not sure that's what he meant. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that he'll back us up if necessary. So it's decided. We're not waiting for her at home. At least not until she's completed her rehabilitation program at Sunset Gardens. Then we'll see. I quietly backed away from the door, feeling my legs tremble. Not from physical weakness, but from the shock and pain of betrayal. My own son and his wife had conspired to throw me out of my own home. We're not waiting for her at home. Those words rang in my head like a slap in the face. I slowly wandered back to my room, trying to make sense of what I had heard. All this talk about caring for me, about how I would be better off in a special centre, it was all just an excuse to get rid of me, to take possession of my home. Back in my room, I sat down on the bed and stared out the window. Rain was falling outside and the drops ran down the glass like tears. But I didn't cry. Something inside me turned to stone, turning into cold determination. They wanted to get rid of me, send me to a nursing home so they could live peacefully in my house. Well, I had other plans. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. At that moment, I made a decision. I would return home sooner than they expected. I would not allow them to control my life and my property. And, if that meant going against the doctor's recommendations, so be it. I pressed the nurse call button. When Rita entered, I already knew what I was going to say. Rita, I said firmly, I need to talk to Dr. Phelps. I want to know when I can be discharged. You're absolutely right. I didn't follow the plan. I apologize. I will rewrite the chapter so that it ends with the call to the police, as indicated in the plan. Dr. Phelps was not thrilled with my decision to check out early, but after much persuasion and signing papers stating that I was refusing further inpatient treatment, he agreed. He insisted on repeat tests and a thorough examination before releasing me. Mrs. Brambleworth, I can't keep you here against your will, he said, closing my medical file. But I must warn you that you are putting your health at risk. After bypass surgery, you need to follow a strict regimen and be under constant supervision. I understand, Dr. Phelps, I replied. I'll find a nurse and follow all your recommendations to the letter. But I need to go home. He sighed but relented. All right, but I insist on a follow-up examination in a week. And you must call an ambulance immediately if you experience chest pain, shortness of breath, or weakness. I agreed to all the conditions. I was given prescriptions for a whole bunch of medications, detailed rehabilitation instructions, and emergency contact numbers. Rita helped me gather my things and call a taxi. She was the only one who knew about my decision to leave without telling Noel. Are you sure you'll be okay? She asked, helping me put on my coat. Maybe you should call your son after all. I shook my head. Don't worry, Rita, I'll be fine. I'll talk to my son when I get home. She looked concerned but didn't insist. As I left the hospital, I took a deep breath of fresh spring air. Despite the pain in my chest and my weakness, I felt a surge of strength at the mere thought of returning home and upsetting Noel and Valerie's plans. The taxi dropped me off at my house on Amberley Street around 6 in the evening. I asked the driver to stop a block away from my house, deciding to walk the rest of the way, partly to stretch my legs after being cooped up in the hospital, partly to prepare myself mentally for seeing my son and daughter-in-law. The evening was quiet and cool. The street, bathed in the soft light of the street lamps, looked peaceful. I walked slowly, leaning on the cane I had been given at the hospital, thinking about what I would say to Noel. I wasn't going to make a scene, at least not right away. I needed to settle in at home first and then decide how to proceed. From a distance, I noticed that the lights were on in our house. This was not surprising. Noel and Valeria were probably at home, but as I got closer, I saw that the lights were on in all the windows, even in rooms that were not usually used. And then I heard music, muffled by the distance but distinct. I slowed down, not understanding what was happening. As I got closer to the house, I saw several cars parked at the gate. One of them belonged to the Brenners, our neighbours 2 houses down. I didn't recognise the other one. I had a bad feeling. Instead of going to the front door, I turned onto a side path leading to the backyard. From there, I could get a better look at what was happening in the house without being seen. As I made my way down the path, I felt the pain in my chest intensify, not from physical exertion, but from growing anxiety. The music grew louder, and I could make out voices and laughter. When I reached the backyard, I stopped at an old apple tree that had been there before Alan and I bought the house. Its branches provided a natural hiding place where I could stand without fear of being seen from the windows. What I saw made me freeze in my tracks. There was a party going on in my house. A real, noisy party, with a dozen guests moving freely between rooms with glasses in their hands. In the living room, someone had pushed the furniture against the walls to create an improvised dance floor. My antique dining table was covered with bottles and plates of snacks. I squinted, trying to make out faces. There were the Brenners, James and Emily, with whom we had been on good terms when Alan was alive, but had hardly spoken to in recent years. There was a young couple I had never seen before, perhaps Noel or Valeria's colleagues. There was Denise Harper, Valeria's friend, who always looked at me with ill-concealed condescension. And there were the hosts of the party themselves, Noel and Valeria. My son, who was supposedly busy at work, was standing by the fireplace with a glass of whiskey, laughing at something James Brenner was saying to him. Valeria, in a new dress I had never seen before, flitted among the guests like a professional hostess at a social gathering. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. My son, who couldn't find the time to visit his mother after her heart surgery, was calmly throwing a party in my house. While I was lying in the hospital worrying about my future, they were having fun as if I didn't exist. I wanted to burst in and make a scene, but something stopped me. Perhaps my years as a tax inspector had taught me to gather information first and act later. I decided to wait and see what would happen next. I didn't have to wait long. Valeria gathered everyone in the living room and tapped a spoon on a glass, calling for silence. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see the guests turning toward her with curiosity. She made a toast, and everyone raised their glasses. Then Noel put his arm around her waist, and they both beamed with happiness. I had to hear what they were saying. I moved cautiously along the wall of the house toward the back entrance. The back door led straight into the kitchen, and if I was quiet enough, I could slip inside unnoticed. It was unlikely that any of the guests were in the kitchen at that moment. They were all in the living room, intrigued by Valeria's speech. I took the keys out of my purse. The old lock on the back door opened almost silently if you knew how to turn the key correctly. I turned it slowly, feeling the familiar click of the mechanism. Then I pushed the door just as carefully, ready to stop at the slightest squeak. But the door opened silently. I slipped inside and quietly closed it behind me. The kitchen was empty, but dirty plates, empty bottles and half-eaten snacks were piled up on the table and countertops. I grimaced, imagining how I would clean it all up. Voices could be heard from the living room, now distinct. I crept up to the archway connecting the kitchen to the hallway, where I could see part of the living room without being seen. "So Noel and I would like to propose a toast," Valeria said, holding a glass of champagne. "To a new chapter in our lives! To finally being able to make this house truly ours!" The guests joined in the toast, but I noticed a few confused looks. James Brenner cleared his throat. "What about your mother, Noel? Hazel isn't—" "Oh, no, Noel quickly interrupted him. "Mum is alive and recovering. We just decided that she would be better off in a specialised centre. Sunset Gardens, do you know it? The conditions there are excellent, with round-the-clock medical care. It's all for her own good," Valeria interjected with a false look of concern. "After such a serious operation, she needs constant supervision, which we, unfortunately, cannot provide." Yes, of course," James muttered, but I could see he wasn't entirely convinced. He knew me and Alan well and remembered how independent I had always been. "So now the house is all ours," Valeria continued, oblivious to his doubts. And we can finally do the renovations I've been dreaming of for years. Down with that old-fashioned wallpaper and heavy curtains. I've already ordered a design for the kitchen. You won't believe how different it's going to look. I felt my fingers clench into fists. She was talking about my house, about things Alan and I had chosen together, as if they were things that should have been thrown away long ago. And she was doing it without even waiting for me to arrive at their sunset gardens. "When is Hazel being transferred?" Emily Brenner asked, and I heard a note of concern in her voice. "Next Thursday," Noel replied. "She doesn't know yet. We decided to tell her at the last minute. You know how it is with older people. They often resist change, even when it's for their own good. Older people, I'm only 67, I'm not some frail old woman." I literally bit my tongue to keep from letting out an indignant exclamation. "Are you sure she'll agree?" asked one of the guests. "She won't have a choice," Valeria said confidently. "Dr. Phelps confirmed that she needs constant care. Noel and I both work. We can't provide that care at home." "That's a lie. Dr. Phelps never said I needed constant care in a specialized facility. He talked about a caregiver for a few hours a day, nothing more." "What about the house?" James asked. "As far as I remember, it belongs to Hazel." There was a short pause. Then Noel coughed awkwardly. "Technically, yes. But we've lived here for 10 years and Mom always said the house would go to me. In any case, she's unlikely to come back here. Many elderly people who end up in places like that decide to stay there permanently. It's safe, comfortable, and there's a lot of company. And most importantly, no worries about maintaining a big house," Valeria added. "Just imagine what it's like at her age to look after all that. No, she'll definitely be better off there." I couldn't listen to these lies any longer. They were talking about me as if I were an incompetent old woman who needed to be isolated from society for her own good. But the real reason was obvious. They wanted my house. The house that Alan and I had bought with our savings, where we had raised Noel, where we had spent the best years of our lives. I quietly backed out of the kitchen, wondering what to do next. Confront them head-on? Storm into the living room and make a scene? Tempting, but hardly productive. Besides, with my recently operated heart, strong emotional shocks could be dangerous. No, I needed something more effective, something that would disrupt their plans once and for all. I remembered how a year ago, Valeria had thrown a tantrum when the neighbours across the street called the police because of their teenage son's noisy party. "What a disgrace," she repeated. "Now everyone will gossip." She was always sensitive about what her neighbours and colleagues thought of her. And Noel had said he was working with a big new client. If his reputation suffered, it could affect his job. A plan began to form in my head. I quietly slipped out the back door, making sure it was closed behind me. I walked around the house and headed for the front door. I took out the key and quietly turned it in the lock, locking the door from the outside. Then I went to the garage and locked the side door leading from there into the house. Now only the back door remained, but I knew I could get to it faster than any of the guests in case of an alarm. Then I stepped back to a safe distance and took out my cell phone. For a second, I hesitated. Was this too much? Was I going too far? But then I remembered Valeria's words. "We're not waiting for her at home," and my determination returned. I dialed the police. "Emergency Services 911, how can I help you?" A female voice answered. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound concerned but not panicked. "I want to report a disturbance. There's a very loud party at 24C and C. Amberley Street. I live next door and can't sleep because of the loud music." "I understand, Ma'am. We'll send a patrol to check it out." I paused, then added, "You know, I didn't want to say anything, but I think there are drugs being used there. I saw several people going out into the backyard and acting very strangely. And also, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I'm almost certain there are prostitutes there. You see, some of the girls were dressed, well, you know." There was a pause at the other end of the line. "Are you sure about what you saw, Ma'am?" "Absolutely," I said firmly. "I've lived here for years and I've never seen anything like it. This is a decent neighbourhood. We don't have that kind of thing here." I had been watching my house from behind a large oak tree across the street. It gave me a good view of the front entrance and driveway. No more than 15 minutes had passed since my call when two police cars with flashing lights appeared on the street. They moved slowly without sirens, but their appearance still attracted the attention of several neighbours who looked out their windows. The cars stopped right in front of my house. Two officers got out of the first car. A middle-aged man with short greying hair and a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Two more emerged from the second car, a young black man and an older woman with red hair. They were all in uniform and looked serious. They exchanged a few words, then headed for the front door. The senior officer rang the doorbell. I saw a silhouette flash in the window next to the door. Someone had looked to see who had arrived. The music coming from inside the house suddenly stopped. The police officer pressed the doorbell again, this time longer. Several more minutes passed before the door finally opened. Noel appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled and his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Even from where I stood, I could see how tense he was. I couldn't hear what was being said, but from their body language, I could tell that the senior officer was explaining something and Noel was shaking his head vigorously. Then the policeman took a step forward, and Noel reluctantly stepped back, letting all four of them inside. I couldn't see what was happening inside the house, but I could imagine it. The police officers walking through the living room filled with guests who had suddenly stopped having fun. Valeria was undoubtedly panicking. She always cared so much about what the neighbours thought, how she looked in the eyes of others. And now there were police at their doorstep. A few minutes later, another police car appeared on the street, this time without flashing lights. Behind it is a minibus with Bolingbroke Police written on the side. 4 more police officers get out of the minibus, 2 of them in plain clothes. One of the plainclothes officers, a tall man with an authoritative air, immediately heads for the house while the others remain by the cars. 10 minutes later, guests began to be led out of the house. The Brenners were the first to leave. James looked angry and was arguing heatedly with the officer accompanying them, while Emily looked simply frightened. They were led to one of the cars where a man in plain clothes was writing something in a notebook. They were followed by other guests, 2 or 3 at a time, accompanied by police officers. Some looked indignant, others embarrassed or frightened. Denise Harper, Valeria's friend, was almost in tears when her documents were checked. I felt a pang of conscience. These people were just guests. They didn't know about Noel and Valeria's plans to send me to a nursing home. They had just come to a party with friends and now found themselves caught up in my revenge. But then Valeria was led out of the house and my doubts instantly melted away. She looked both angry and frightened. Her perfectly styled hair was dishevelled, and her makeup was smudged, probably from crying. Noel followed behind her, pale and confused. They were led to a plainclothes police officer who asked them questions for a long time, writing down their answers. Valeria gestured energetically, pointing first at the house, then at herself. Noel remained mostly silent, only occasionally nodding or shaking his head. Finally, they were also put into a police car, not the one with the other guests, but a separate one. The doors slammed shut and the cars drove off. The entire motorcade, 3 police cars and a minibus, slowly moved down the street and disappeared around a bend. I waited until they were far enough away, and only then did I emerge from my hiding place. Slowly, leaning on my cane, I crossed the street and approached my house. The door was unlocked. The police had apparently not bothered to close it. Inside, chaos reigned. In the living room, chairs and armchairs had been pushed against the walls to make room for dancing. Half-empty glasses and plates of half-eaten snacks stood on the coffee table. In the corner of the room, I noticed an overturned chair. Perhaps someone had stood up too quickly when the police arrived. The kitchen was even worse. The sink was piled high with dirty dishes, and the table was covered with open bottles of alcohol, crumbs from snacks, and spilled wine. My favourite tablecloth, embroidered by my mother, was hopelessly ruined by red wine. I went upstairs. The door to my bedroom was closed. At least they had the decency not to throw a party in my room. But in Noel and Valerie's bedroom, someone's coats and bags were lying on the bed, and there were glasses on the bedside table. They had turned even their bedroom into an extension of the party. I went back downstairs and sat down in my favourite armchair by the fireplace, the only piece of furniture that was still in its place. The house seemed unusually quiet after the noise of the party. Only the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner of the living room broke the silence. I should have felt satisfied with my revenge, but instead, I felt a strange emptiness. Yes, I had ruined their plans. Yes, they would have to spend the night at the police station explaining themselves. But what next? Would they come back, and we would continue to live under the same roof in a state of Cold War? Or would they find a way to send me to Sunset Gardens after all? No, that couldn't be allowed to happen. I had to see this through to the end. And for that, I had to wait until morning. I spent the night in my chair, unable to get up to go to my bedroom because of exhaustion and chest pains. I dozed off several times but woke up quickly at the slightest noise. The medication I had been prescribed at the hospital was in my bag, and my bag was in the taxi. I regretted not taking them with me when I asked the driver to stop a block away from home. With the first rays of sunlight, I got up, wincing from the pain in my stiff muscles. In the bathroom on the first floor, I managed to tidy myself up, wash my face, and comb my hair. The mirror reflected a tired woman with a pale face and dark circles under her eyes, but there was determination in those eyes. I found some painkillers in the kitchen cabinet, took a pill, and forced myself to eat a piece of toast with jam. I needed strength for what I had to do. At 7 in the morning, I called a taxi and went to the police station. It was a low brick building in the centre of Bolingbroke, with a flag above the entrance and a parking lot for police cars on the side. I slowly climbed the steps, holding onto the railing, and went inside. Behind the desk sat a young police officer with a neatly trimmed moustache. He looked up when I entered. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "Good morning," I said, trying to sound confident. "I'm here about yesterday's incident at 24 Amberley Street. I'm the owner of the house, Hazel Brambleworth." His eyebrows rose slightly. "One moment, ma'am." He picked up the phone and said something quietly. A few minutes later, one of the plainclothes men I had seen yesterday emerged from a side door, a tall man with an authoritative air. "Mrs. Brambleworth?" he asked, extending his hand. "Detective Robert Parker. We've been trying to reach you. Please come with me to my office." I followed him through the door into the hallway, then into a small office with a desk piled high with papers and 2 chairs for visitors. "Have a seat," said the detective, pointing to a chair. "I must say your arrival is very timely. We're just sorting out the situation at your house." "There was a party at my house without my knowledge or consent," I said. "I came back yesterday from the hospital where I had heart surgery and found that my son and his wife had thrown a party while I was away." The detective looked at me closely. "So you didn't know about the party? That's interesting. Your son claims that you are still in the hospital and must remain there until at least next week. As you can see, that's not true." I unbuttoned the top buttons of my blouse, revealing the bandage on my chest. "I was discharged yesterday ahead of schedule because I found out that my son and his wife were planning to send me to a nursing home against my will as soon as I left the hospital." Detective Parker frowned. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Brambleworth." "It's true," I said firmly. "I overheard them talking in the hospital. They thought I was in treatment and discussed their plans openly. They've already paid the first installment to Sunset Gardens and were going to tell me at the last minute when they thought I'd have no choice." "I see." The detective nodded slowly. "And yesterday's party?" "As I said, I came home and found a party going on. I overheard them bragging to their guests that the house was now all theirs, even though it legally belongs to me. Valeria, my sister-in-law, even talked about renovation plans, about how they would get rid of the old-fashioned things I had chosen with my late husband. And you called the police. It was a statement, not a question. I didn't deny it. Yes, I called the police. The noisy party was disturbing the peace, but I didn't say anything about drugs or other things. That's all exaggeration." Detective Parker smiled slightly. "We figured as much when we found no drugs or prostitutes, but the anonymous call was quite convincing. and we are obliged to investigate such reports. I admit I exaggerated, I said, but understand my situation. I've just come out of the hospital after a serious operation, and the first thing I see is my relatives celebrating getting rid of me. The detective nodded again. I'm not judging you, Mrs. Brambleworth, but we had to detain everyone present to clarify the circumstances. We released most of the guests yesterday after checking their documents and taking their statements, but your son and his wife spent the night here. Are they drunk? I asked. They were slightly intoxicated, yes, but not enough to detain them on that charge. Rather, we needed to sort out the situation, and since it involved a residence and a possible violation of property rights, we decided to hold them until morning and clarify everything officially. I want them out of my house, I said bluntly. Immediately. They had lived there for 10 years, enjoyed my hospitality, and in return planned to effectively throw me out on the street. That's your right as the owner, the detective agreed. But there are certain legal procedures for eviction. Even if they don't pay rent, they are considered tenants and have certain rights. What procedures? I asked. You'll need to file a formal eviction notice, he explained. In Illinois, you must give tenants at least 30 days' notice. After that, if they don't move out voluntarily, you can file an eviction lawsuit in court. 30 days. I couldn't wait that long. I couldn't imagine spending a month under the same roof with people who had betrayed me and were waiting for the right moment to get rid of me. What if they agree to move out voluntarily? I asked, without formal notice. Then there won't be a problem, Detective Parker replied. If they sign a voluntary eviction agreement, they can move out at any time by mutual agreement. I want to talk to them, I said firmly. Now. The detective hesitated but then nodded. All right. They're in interrogation room number 2. I'll take you there. He got up from his desk and I followed him down the hallway to a door marked Interrogation 2. Before opening the door, Detective Parker turned to me. I'll be present during the conversation if you don't mind, just for the record. I nodded, and he opened the door. The room was small with grey walls and a simple table in the middle. Noel and Valeria were sitting at the table. They looked terrible. Their clothes were rumpled, their faces tired, and they had dark circles under their eyes. When we entered, they looked up at the same time, and I saw their expressions change from surprise to shock, and then to something resembling fear. "Mom!" Noel exclaimed, jumping up from his chair. "What are you doing here? You should be in the hospital." As you can see, I'm not in the hospital, I replied calmly, sitting down across from them. I'm home, in my house, which you were so quick to claim as your own. Valeria paled. Hazel, this is some kind of misunderstanding. We were just... I heard everything, Valeria, I interrupted her. I came home last night and saw your party. I heard you tell your guests that this house is now all yours. How you bragged about your plans to renovate it and get rid of my old-fashioned things. You were eavesdropping, Noel exclaimed indignantly. In my own house. Yes, I was eavesdropping. And I learned a lot of interesting things. Like the fact that you were planning to send me to Sunset Gardens without even asking my opinion. It's for your own good, Valeria exclaimed. After your operation, you need care that we can't provide. Don't lie, I said coldly. I heard your conversation at the hospital. She won't come back home. It's time to start living your life without looking back. You just wanted to get rid of me so you could take over my house. There was a heavy pause. Noel lowered his eyes, unable to meet my gaze. Valeria pressed her lips into a thin line. I came to tell you, I continued, looking straight at them, that you no longer live in my house. I'm evicting you. Today. You can't do that, Valeria exclaimed. We've lived there for 10 years. We have rights. Detective Parker explained the tenant's rights to me, I nodded. 30 days' notice, yes, but he also said that if you agree to move out voluntarily, we can skip the formalities. And if we don't agree? Valeria asked defiantly. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then I'll file an official eviction notice, and perhaps I'll file a fraud claim as well. For attempting to illegally dispose of my property in my absence. Oh, and for slander. You told the guests that I was incapacitated and needed constant care, even though Dr. Phelps never said such a thing. Valeria paled even more. Noel finally looked up. Mum, we never meant to. Don't lie to me, Noel, I said wearily. I heard your conversations. I know what you were planning. And now I want you out of my house. Today. Detective Parker, who had been silently observing our conversation, cleared his throat. If I may suggest a compromise, perhaps Mr. and Mrs. Brambleworth should be given a few days to find new accommodation and pack their things. Until the end of the week, perhaps. I thought about it. On the one hand, I wanted them out of my life immediately. On the other hand, I realized that even with all their faults, they didn't deserve to be out on the street with no roof over their heads. Until the end of the week, I finally agreed. No longer. And you'll live on the second floor and not come down unless absolutely necessary. I don't want to see you. Noel nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. Okay, Mom. Thanks. Don't thank me, I said sharply. If I followed your example, I would have changed the locks while you were here and thrown your things out onto the street. Be thankful that I'm better than you. I stood up, leaning on my cane, and turned to Detective Parker. Can I go? Or do I need to sign any papers? You will need to submit a written statement stating that you are not pressing charges for trespassing, as Mr. and Mrs. Brambleworth were living there with your consent, he replied, and perhaps clarify the details of your verbal agreement regarding the terms of eviction. All right, I nodded. Where do I do that? I'll take you to the secretary, said the detective, opening the door. She'll prepare all the necessary forms. I headed for the exit but stopped at the door and turned back. One more thing. When I return home, I expect all the mess from your party to be cleaned up, every plate washed, every chair in its place. If anything is out of order, I will reconsider our agreement on the terms. Without waiting for a response, I left the room, leaving Noel and Valeria sitting in silence contemplating their new situation, the situation of people being kicked out of a home they had come to consider their own. By the weekend, the house was empty. Noel and Valeria moved out on Thursday, one day before the deadline I had set. I was in my bedroom when I heard them carrying their belongings down the stairs and out of the house. I didn't go out to say goodbye. There were no tears, no hugs, no words of forgiveness on either side. Just the quiet click of the front door, the sound of an engine starting, and silence. I went downstairs when I was sure they were gone. I walked through the rooms, checking to see if they had taken everything. The second floor looked unusually empty. Bare mattresses on the beds, empty wardrobes with the doors wide open, marks on the walls where pictures had been hanging. They had taken everything they considered theirs, including a few things that I was sure belonged to me, but I didn't make a fuss about it. It was a small price to pay to finally be alone in my own home. On the kitchen table, I found an envelope with keys and a short note from Noel. Mum, we're moving out, just like you wanted. We rented an apartment in Riverside. I'm sorry if we hurt you. It wasn't our intention. We really thought you'd be better off in Sunset Gardens, considering your health. Call me when you're ready to talk. No. No apology from Valeria, no surprise there. I crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash. Then I called a locksmith and arranged to have all the locks in the house replaced. He arrived that same day, an elderly man with kind eyes and a grey beard that almost hid his face. Family problems? He asked as he installed a new lock on the front door. Something like that? I replied evasively. I understand, he nodded. My daughter recently got divorced. She changed her locks first thing too. These days you never know who you can trust. He finished his work by evening, handed me the new keys and said goodbye. I locked the door behind him and felt truly safe in my own home for the first time in many years. The next day I went to the local hardware store to buy paint for the living room. Valerie had always criticised the pastel yellow colour of the walls, saying it was old-fashioned and boring. Now I could repaint the walls any colour I wanted. I chose a rich terracotta, a warm, earthy shade that Alan had always liked. At the store I ran into Emily Brenner. She looked visibly embarrassed when she saw me and tried to hide behind a rack of gardening tools, but I approached her myself. Hello, Emily. Hazel, she smiled nervously. How are you? How's your health? I'm recovering, I replied. Thank you for asking. An awkward pause. We both knew we needed to discuss that evening, but neither of us knew how to start. "Listen, about that party," she finally said. "James and I didn't know you were in the hospital. Noel said you'd gone to visit relatives in Michigan for a couple of weeks. We would never have—" "I know," I interrupted her. "It's not your fault. You were just at a friend's party." "I still feel really awkward," Emily said, looking down at the floor, "especially because of what happened after, with the police and everything. James is still furious. They detained him for 4 hours, and he had an important meeting with a client the next day." "I'm sorry that happened," I said, and I meant it. I didn't want innocent people to get hurt. "I hope it didn't hurt his job." "No, but—" she hesitated. "It hurt Noel's. Did you hear?" I shook my head. Noel and I hadn't spoken since he moved out. "His insurance company dropped him," Emily said quietly. "Something about reputational risks and breach of conduct. One of the guests at the party turned out to be his boss's brother, and when he found out about the police arrest—" She didn't finish, but I understood. I felt a pang of guilt. I wanted to teach Noel a lesson but not deprive him of his livelihood. "I'm sure he'll find another job," I said, more to reassure myself than Emily. "Probably," she replied uncertainly, "but not in Bolingbroke. There's so much gossip about them after what happened." "You know how it is in small towns, I know. That's exactly what I was counting on when I called the police and mentioned drugs and prostitutes. I wanted to humiliate them, the way they humiliated me by planning to send me to a nursing home. But now that my plan had worked even better than I expected, I felt no satisfaction, just exhaustion and something like emptiness." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you," Emily said, noticing the look on my face. "You just had surgery. You need to take care of yourself." "It's okay," I assured her. "I just need some time to get used to the new situation." We exchanged a few more words, and Emily invited me over for tea sometime. I thanked her, but we both knew I was unlikely to take her up on the offer. Too much had happened. Too much had changed. When I got home with the can of paint, I found a box of my things on the doorstep. There was a note from Valerie on top. "Hazel, we found these things among our things. They belong to you. Valerie." Cold, businesslike, no apologies or warm words, typical of her. The box contained photo albums, several books, an antique vase that Alan had given me on our 20th wedding anniversary, and a few other small items that they had probably taken by mistake in their rush to move out. I took the box to the living room and sat down on the sofa, sorting through the items. One of the albums caught my attention. It was old, with a worn leather cover and faded photographs inside. Photographs of my youth, my parents, my aunts and uncles, most of whom had long since passed away. In one picture, I recognized my cousin Lillian. We were close as children, but then life took us in different directions. She moved to California, got married, and had children. We exchanged occasional letters and Christmas cards, but gradually we lost touch. The last I heard from her was about 15 years ago. I think she had been widowed and moved somewhere closer to her daughter. I looked at a photo of Lillian and me, just girls, laughing as we sat on the fence of our grandparents' farm. I suddenly wanted to know what had happened to her, whether she was still alive, how her life had turned out. Putting the album aside, I turned on my computer. It was an old desktop computer that I rarely used, mainly for checking email and occasionally searching for recipes. But I knew that you could find almost anyone on the internet, if you knew where to look. After several hours of searching and a few dead ends, I found information about Lillian Everett, née Morton. My maternal aunt was married to her father. She was indeed alive, 82 years old, and living in a small town in Wisconsin, just 2 hours' drive from Bolingbroke. Her husband had died more than 20 years ago, and she had been living alone ever since, although her daughter and grandchildren lived nearby. I found her address and phone number in an online directory. I sat there for a long time, staring at the numbers, not daring to dial. What would I say to her after so many years of silence? Would she believe that I suddenly wanted to reconnect? Would she think it was strange or intrusive? But something pushed me to do it. Maybe it was a recent realization of how fragile family ties can be, or just a desire to have someone close who remembers me when I was young, who knows where I came from, and who I was before I became Mrs. Brambleworth. I dialed the number, and after a few rings, I heard an elderly but still lively voice. "Hello, this is Lillian Everett speaking." "Lillian?" My voice faltered. "This is Hazel. Hazel Brambleworth, née Parker." A pause, then a surprised sigh. "Hazel? My goodness, it's been ages. I thought you'd forgotten all about me." "Never," I replied sincerely. "It's just life. You know how it is." "Oh, I'm sure you did," she laughed, and in that laugh I heard echoes of the girl in the photograph. "But how did you find me? And why now?" I told her about recent events, the heart surgery, the betrayal of my son and daughter-in-law, how I kicked them out of the house. Lillian listened, sometimes gasping or clicking her tongue, but never interrupting. "Oh, Hazel," she said when I finished. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone, but I'm proud of you. You've always been strong, even as a child. Remember how you defended me from those boys who teased me about my freckles?" I laughed as I remembered the episode. "Of course, I hit one of them over the head with your lunchbox. Mum gave me such a scolding." "But you never complained that it was because of me," Lillian said gently. "That's the kind of person you are, Hazel. You protect those you love, even if you have to pay for it." We talked for over an hour, reminiscing about our childhood and catching up on our lives over the past years. I learned that Lillian had 3 grandchildren and even a great-grandchild, that she was still active in her community and ran a book club at the local library. "You must come visit me," she said before we said goodbye. "As soon as the doctors allow you to travel long distances. I'll show you my garden. You won't believe the roses I have, and I'll introduce you to my brood of grandchildren." "I'll be sure to come," I promised. And this time, I really meant it. After talking to Lillian, I felt lighter. It was as if the weight I had been carrying in my chest for the past few weeks had lifted a little. I wasn't alone in this world. I had a family. Not the one that had betrayed me, but a real one. Bound not only by blood, but by shared memories and a common history. In the weeks that followed, I gradually recovered both physically and emotionally. I saw Dr. Phelps regularly for checkups, and he was pleased with my progress. The wound was healing well, my heart was working properly, and thanks to the new shunts, my blood flow had improved. "You're making amazing progress, Mrs. Brambleworth," he said during one of his visits. "Many patients half your age recover much more slowly." "I'm highly motivated," I replied. "I want to live life to the fullest while I can." And that was true. After everything that had happened, I realized how precious life is and how important it is not to waste it on people who don't appreciate you. I started to transform the house, not because I wanted to erase all traces of Noel and Valeria, but because I wanted to make it truly mine. I repainted the living room walls the same terracotta color, replaced the curtains, and bought a new rug for the hallway. Small changes, but they made the house cozier, more mine. One day, while browsing the local newspaper, I came across an advertisement for a book club meeting at the city library. They were discussing Jane Eyre, one of my favourite novels. Without thinking twice, I decided to go. The club met in a cosy corner of the library surrounded by bookshelves. There were about a dozen women of all ages, from college students to elderly ladies who were clearly older than me. They welcomed me warmly, and I immediately felt comfortable. The discussion was lively and interesting. I hadn't talked about literature with someone who really loved books in a long time, and I found that I had a lot to say. When I shared my opinion about Jane's strong character and her desire for independence, several women nodded in agreement. "You should come to the next meeting," said Martha, a grey-haired woman who, as it turned out, was the founder of the club. "We'll be discussing George Eliot's Middlemarch." "I'd love to," I replied, and it wasn't just politeness. After that, I began attending the book club regularly. I made new acquaintances, some of which gradually developed into friendships. I began to leave the house more often and participate in community life. I enrolled in gardening classes at a local college and joined a Nordic walking group for seniors. I heard little about Noel and Valerie. Emily Brenner once mentioned that they had moved to Chicago, where Noel had found a new job at another insurance company. She didn't know any details, and I didn't ask. Their lives no longer intersected with mine, and I was fine with that. Sometimes, usually late at night when the house was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I wondered if I had done the right thing by cutting off all contact with my only son. Maybe, with time, we could have reconciled, found a way to coexist. But then I remembered their plans to send me to Sunset Gardens against my will. Their conversations about how they would get rid of my things, their willingness to erase all traces of my presence in the house I had built with Alan, and my resolve returned. I don't have to forgive betrayal just because the betrayer is my son. I deserve respect. I deserve the right to decide how and where I live. I deserve the right to my own home and my own life. One morning, about 3 months after Noel and Valerie moved out, I woke up to the doorbell ringing. It was early Sunday morning and I wasn't expecting any visitors. I threw on my robe and went downstairs to look through the peephole. Standing on the porch was a delivery man with a large basket of flowers. I opened the door and he handed me the basket along with an envelope. Delivery for Mrs. Hazel Brambleworth. Thanking him, I carried the basket into the house and placed it on the kitchen table. I opened the envelope and took out a card. Dear Cousin Hazel, I look forward to your visit next Saturday. I hope the trip isn't too tiring for you. These flowers are a little preview of what you'll see in my garden. With love, Lillian. I smiled as I breathed in the scent of fresh roses and lilies. In a week, I would be traveling to Wisconsin to see Lillian, with whom I now spoke on the phone almost every day. Dr. Phelps had given me the go-ahead for the trip, saying my heart was strong enough for such a journey. I gently ran my fingers over the rose petals, enjoying their silky texture. Life was going on. Not the life I had imagined, not the life it could have been if my son hadn't betrayed me, but still a life full of new opportunities, new connections, new discoveries. I survived heart surgery. I survived the betrayal of those closest to me. And now I will live, on my own terms, in my own home, surrounded by people who truly care about me. I placed the basket of flowers on the windowsill in the living room, where the morning sun was shining on it. A symbol of a new chapter in my life. A chapter I will write myself, without anyone else's instructions or expectations. I am Hazel Brambleworth, and I am stronger than anyone could have imagined, including myself.